Hey everyone, I just felt like doing a sort of casual video in which I chat about mostly about some books I've read recently. So yeah, I want to just chat about a few fiction books I've read and share some thoughts on them. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about editing and my thoughts, some of my thoughts on editing, and some personal quirks of mine as an editor. So, and the reason maybe that I work as an editor. That's part of, so I think about editing all the time and what an editor, should or shouldn't bring to the process of editing. I think, let me start by saying that, yes, so recently I read Dreyer's English by Benjamin Dreyer. Dreyer was formerly the copy chief of Random House. And um, I like this book very much. It's probably primarily for people who are interested in style, and or in editing. But what it's conversational. It's warm. It's got some great anecdotes in it. Lots of good, useful examples, and it's very approachable. What I like about Dreyer as a person and as an editor is that he, like me, um, he doesn't have a kind of like encyclopedic knowledge of like proper grammar and style, in his head that he operates from. It's not like you get the sense, at least, and forgive me, Mr. Dreyer, if you consider this a mischaracterization, when he's reading something, as an editor, you get the sense, or I got the sense, that he's reading it, as a reader. He's a good reader, like me, and he's just trying to determine if it's clear, if it's enjoyable to read, rather than kind of doing a Terminator like, scan to see like, violation of such and such, thing that doesn't really impact, maybe the experience of most readers. Right. I try to be that way as well for the most part. Like, not that I'm not going to correct something if that's wrong. In any case, I will. But I similarly, like, I know when I need to resort to looking up something in a proper style guide, but I'm primarily concerned not with like a rigid standard of correctness, but with clarity, with with something flowing well, with it being pleasant, or engaging to read. And I I read this piece just yesterday or the day before by Hamilton Nolan. It's from Gawker. It's from 2014, so about 12 years ago now, in which he said something that I totally understand and I really strongly agree with about editors. And I want to read a little excerpt of that here. If I can remember where I put it. I know I have the link here somewhere. There it is. Okay, so the piece is called Against Editors, and I will put a link to it in the description of this video. But, and this is just a paragraph from, in the middle or toward the end of the piece, but I think it gets at the idea quite well, right? Hamilton's concern, or why Hamilton Nolan here is making this larger argument against editors, as it were. He writes, go find a story published a few years ago in The New Yorker, perhaps America's most tightly edited magazine. Give that story to an editor and tell him it's a draft. I guarantee you that editor will take that story, well-polished diamond that it presumably is, and suggest a host of changes. Rewrite the story to the specifications of the new editor, then take it to another editor and repeat the process. You will find once again that the new editor has changes in mind. If you were a masochist, you could continue this process indefinitely. You would never find an editor who read the story, set down his pencil, and said, looks fine, the story is perfect. This is because editing is an art, not a science. To imagine that more editors will produce a better story is akin to imagining that a song by your favorite band would be better if, after the band finished it, it was remixed by a succession of 10 producers, one after the other. Would it be different? Yes. Would it be better? I doubt it. The only thing you can be sure of is that it would not be the song that the actual musicians wanted it to be. Okay. So when I approach something as an editor in my work, I try as much as possible to trust the writer and to view my work as trying to bring out what, enhance, make whatever the writer has already brought to it come through even more clearly. So yes, I will, smooth out a sentence here and there. I will try to, anything where the wording seems clunky or convoluted to me as a reader, if I'm reading it and things just feel kind of bumpy here or there, I'll try to find ways to smooth it out. But I try not to bring my idea of what the piece should be, to bear. Like to not have such ideas in my head, like to not say, and that's not to say in my work, that if I read something and I think the judgment is just utterly lacking or what have you, then I won't, because I do have to, in my role, I have to exercise a certain degree of that kind of editorial judgment of is this something we as a website, want to be saying that we can stand by, that we feel, the argument is there, that this piece, makes that argument, etc. But as a writer, I repeatedly have had those experiences where I would submit my work for editing and feel like the editor was just making changes, some of them for the sake of making changes, or trying to, making it how they would have written it if they were the writer, rather than changes that in my view actually benefited the piece, right? So I very much try not to do that as an editor. Now, I'm not the one to judge how successful or unsuccessful I am at that, but I want to briefly mention though, in one thing that Dreyer gets at in his book, and that I strongly agree with. I think it's unquestionable, is that language evolves and is always evolving. It's probably evolving more rapidly now in some ways than ever before. And one thing that is absolutely not your job as an editor is to try to prevent language from evolving. It's to try to say oh no, that's a new term or a new word. It's not really a word yet. Let's, no, the English language was perfect in 1985. It had all the words we ever needed, and we're going to just keep using the 1985 version of the English language as the years and the decades pass. I love the evolution of language. I love the way that new, useful, colorful, vibrant terms are often emerging. Having said that, I do just kind of want to, acknowledge that I have my own sensibilities as a reader and as an editor, and that there are a few little evolutions in language happening that I don't like, and that I'm not, that I do kind of push back against when I encounter them as an editor. Now, one of them, and this is something that comes up fairly often given that I write or I edit pieces about video games. One of them is the use of the term horror, standalone, just horror, to refer to a horror film or a horror game. Okay? And I think this may have historically been more common and more just accepted as totally normal and natural in maybe Australia, maybe the UK. I don't really know. I think the first time I saw a person do this, they were an Australian writer. And this was like 12 years ago. But now I feel like I'm seeing it more and more. So they might say, like, Resident Evil Requiem is a horror. And in my experience growing up, as as an American English speaker and a reader of things written in American English, like that was just not done. Like you don't. No, it's a horror. This is a horror movie. This is a horror game and I think so still even to this, so I'm being exposed to it more and more often, but still when I say Resident Evil Requiem is a horror, it doesn't, it just in my brain it just feels wrong. It doesn't quite click, and I wonder if part of that is that I feel like there's ambiguity there, because horror, like, look, obviously, like, we have the word thrill, like, this film is a thriller, right? This is a comedy. But then you have things where you don't do that, like action, like you wouldn't say Die Hard is an action, as Die Hard is an action film, right? And I think horror, like maybe it's just that there's ambiguity there, because I think the word horror can be, it can mean that something is like just not in the horror genre, but is itself like horrifically bad or horrifying, like this, it's Resident Evil Requiem is a horror. Like, does that mean, it's a complete and utter, like, failure? Like, I don't know. It's just not, my brain just wants that game, that wants that word there. It something about the construction. I just can't, I can't yet. Maybe I'll get there, but I can't yet get to the point where, in my mind, when I read that, it doesn't feel a little bumpy. Like, no, I'm gonna put game in there, just because for me that makes it smoother. It makes it more clear. The other thing that I want to talk about here, the other kind of language. Like evolution that I'm not on board with yet, I can't bring myself to fully embrace, is couple, like noun, couple things, right? Rather than couple of things. So, again, like my experience again in American English and speaking and reading and writing it is you could say a few X or a couple of X, but not a couple X. Now that's not to say that I wouldn't hear anyone or in any context somebody say couple X, but it has to me like a Chicago gang, like, hey Vinny, you take a couple guys and go down and see, check in on Santini. Sure thing, boss. Me and a couple guys will go down there. Like, yeah, there's a context in which you might say a couple this, but it's not, it's not like proper. And if it's written in a book where it's a part of a character's voice, like, it's fine. Of course, it's totally fine. Like, okay, if that's like how that character speaks, that's totally fine. But I mean, I'm seeing it in like not in usages that are meant to convey like a certain kind of color or to have a certain kind of flavor to them, but rather just like plain normal like communication. And like I can't. I can't. I always want to put the of in there. Couple of. And the funny thing is, like, perhaps the place where I've seen it lots of places lately, but perhaps where I have spotted it the most recently is in Dungeon Crawler Carl by Matt Dinniman. Dinniman in this book at least is an just incorrigible user of couple X, couple this, couple that, couple this, couple that. And like, is this a legitimate like criticism of the book as a, in the context of everything that it's doing? No, it's not. I want to be clear, but it is a little thing that st- just stuck out to me a little bit because, again, right? If it were, say, the main character Carl using this, this phrase all the time, I'd be like, okay, that, Carl, that's fine. That's how Carl talks. But it's not. It's the narrator, as it were, of this book. Sorry, not the narrator, but because the narrator is Carl. But what I mean is, like, it's like, the like, there will be, like, every character might do it. Like, there's like an AI the voice, that speaks to the contestants in the dungeon sometimes, and it will speak, it will say couple X, right? And it's just like, so I think, if I had copy edited this book, right, I would have, and maybe whoever copy edited it did do this, right? I have no way of knowing, but I would have, like, gently suggested to Matt Dinniman, like, well, maybe change up some of these couple X, maybe say couple of, here and there, maybe say few, more often, and and don't, and maybe don't have, like, it be a thing that every character is liable to do, right? Because it seems like it kind of, because, like, Dinniman is pretty good at giving characters their own personality and their own voice, but then when they all kind of use, say, couple X, it's like, it seems like the, the a limit of the writer, or like the writer's voice kind of bleeding into all the characters' voices in a way that, at least for me as a reader, was a little conspicuous. Okay, so that concludes my two little, terms, or, little language evolution things that I where I'm like, digging my heels in a little bit and being like, no, I'm not gonna let you just call Friday the 13th a horror. It's a horror movie, damn it. Um, you know, um, and let me just briefly say about this book, Dungeon Crawler Carl. Like, really, really fun, and you know, I don't know if you know this, but I play a lot of video games. Um, I really, yeah. I mean, this book is fascinating for its use of game logic in ways that, are, I think, way more subversive and thought provoking and interesting than uh, I guess something like Ready Player One, which certainly was enamored with video games, but, in a way that just wanted to kind of replicate, like, hey, remember how cool Magic Sword was? Rather than, like, doing anything with the logic in a real way, or interrogating it, or, like, twisting it a little bit. So, um, you know, uh, yeah, like, uh, you know, as gamers, right, as players, we know the way in which games just, like, many games, ask us to deny, like, personhood, or any life value to the enemies, right? They are just there for us to kill, to destroy, to gun down, to stomp on, to whatever. And um and while, and so Carl, the main character here, is trapped in a situation where the rules, the system that he's in, would have him view the enemies in the dungeon that same way, as just like, you know they're a danger to me, it's kill or be killed. I got to take them out, get experience, whatever. But you know, neither Carl nor Matt Dinniman wants, you know, um, it views it that simply, and nor thus do we as readers, right? The beings, the monsters that live in the dungeon, right? They are very much worthy of our consideration, and yeah, I mean, this book is it's surprisingly it's surprisingly like well plotted, you know, in the sense that like um Dinniman is great at planting kind of like there were times where so for you know I'm not gonna this isn't I'm gonna be very general here. I'm not gonna spoil anything you know specific, but you know the AI might kind of like talk about oh and you know there's a new rule or a new regulation we've had to establish in the dungeon like such and such, and you know as you're reading the book you know you're kind of go like that stuff just kind of gets filtered into like oh background knowledge background noise oh it's like world building it gives it a little more color like the rules or whatever, and then suddenly one of those things one of those details that you thought was just kind of like fun kind of like patch oh it's a patch note for the for you know for the MMO like okay you know that's cool like that he's really conceptualizing of this in this larger way, but then you know one of those details might come back and suddenly like explode into Carl's life, Carl's experience of the dungeon, and our experience of, as readers in a way that's like completely like unexpected, but totally fair and legit because the book was, you know, telling us this the whole time, right? And also like yeah, I mean, just a really really ethical book, a surprisingly moving book at times. You know, I may like a friend of mine, Tevis, tore through, I think, the first 4 books real fast. They have a really wonderful video on the series, which I will link to in the description below. Highly encouraged, especially you know, especially if you've read any of the series, but even if you haven't, like, you know, if you haven't read these books and you think, you know, I've seen some people just kind of, you know, kind of dismiss Carl without reading it or without really giving it a chance. And I mean, that's fine. Like, obviously, we all have our limited time, but I mean, if you know, I would say that, and yes, like you know, but I think there's a lot going on here ethically. They have a real moral core to them that's, I mean, it's real and true, and it certainly is resonant right now. And you know, if you want to hear somebody make a very, I think, very compelling argument for what these books are really doing and what they offer at this moment in time, because Tevis's video is great about, you know, talking about the books on their own terms, but also contextualizing them in the period during which they read the books, which is the past, you know, few years. So I'll link to that in the description below. Okay, so moving on, the next 2 books I want to talk about, like side by side, they're a study in similarities and in contrasts. I think. Well, maybe okay. So the 2 books are Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico and Paradais by Fernanda Melchor. So look, both very very slim volumes here, and interestingly to me at least, both I was turned on to each of these separately by the stand-up comedian Anthony Jeselnik. Jeselnik is doing a book club this year in which every month he picks a book and you know folks can read it, and he talks about it in a YouTube video at the end of the month. And this is the book for February of 2025. But then excuse me, February of 2026. But last year, at the end of last year, he posted a list of his favorite books that he read that year, and this was like his favorite. And you know, I admit I was drawn to both in part because they're short. so I I'm still not reading as many books as I would like. I mean, um, the pandemic really fucked up my ability to read books. I mean, yeah, read books and so when I see a shorter book, it's like, okay, that comes well recommended and that sounds interesting to me. Like, there's an appeal there. Um, uh, okay, so what? But what's interesting about these two books, in relation to each other, is that uh, both of them are very, very concerned with the ways in which the their central characters, their most important characters, are shaped, are influenced, are in some cases limited, by kind of larger social forces. Okay, social forces that are larger than them. But they take very different approaches to telling their stories, and I mean they have they're about very, very different things. um and I think each approach works really well for the story that it's telling and for the aims of that author with the story that they're telling. So so for instance, this book, Perfection, right? It's about a married couple named Anna and Tom. They're living in Berlin, but they're not German. They moved there. They're European, though. I'm forgetting where they hailed from off at the moment, but it doesn't really matter for the sake of this. They so this book. Okay, reading this book, it's like you're regarding Anna and Tom's lives through the clearest pane of glass, right? You are at a bit of a remove, but you see, like, you see their lives laid out, and there is not, to the best of my recollection at least, there is not a single word of spoken, like, dialogue in this book. It isn't, Tom said blah blah blah, and Anna said blah blah blah. No, there's none of that. Um, and yet, so Anna and Tom, they live a somewhat privileged life. I mean, they're young-ish professionals. They make quite decent money, though not to the degree where money is no object, but they certainly have what many of us would consider a quite a privileged existence. They do work designing websites and so on. But the thing about their lives is that um it's like there's this, like, they always have this image of, like, how things are going to feel once they do a thing, or how things are supposed to feel, or how things are supposed to look. And never does the experience live up to that notion. And thus there's this just constant, like, undercutting of, like, disappointment and, like, uncertainty, like, nagging at, like, just flowing underneath their lives. Like and you really, you get the sense, I mean, like, obviously there's something being said here about the way that I think a lot of us absorb all these images and things and these ideas from maybe, like, just the well, just the calculated, like, Instagram post, the social media barrage of, like, life as something you might see in in a glossy magazine, right? And then the way that the reality of life is, always kind of is not that way, right? It's not that way. Yeah. Let me see if there's just like a little um paragraph or something I can uh um okay, here. Um the client, so they do web design work, right? And so here, the client pulled out 3 months into the 6 they had originally requested. It wasn't that they were unhappy with Anna and Tom's work. So satisfied were they, in fact, that the board decided they had done enough, and the rest they could carry on in-house. The kill fee was a quarter of the sum they had agreed on. After a couple of tentative meetings with Steglitz-based lawyers who spoke in slow, blunt English, Anna and Tom had agreed to the terms. The amount was marginally more than they would normally have earned in the same time frame, but during those 3 months they had hardly spent any money, so overall they made a gain. But all in all, it hadn't been worth it. They took the balance sheet down from the fridge and spent 2 whole days cleaning the house with Netflix blathering on in the background. It took them a couple of weeks to find new commissions and gear themselves up to work on them. By then, the additional earnings had mostly been spent, and by the end of the year, they would barely see any difference in their income. It was better this way. They wouldn't have wanted too stark a reminder of what might have been. Over time, the memory of those energized days soured into a painful chapter in their personal histories, a failed or at least futile transformation. Yeah, so, just this constant kind of things not coming together in the kind of perfect way that they imagine, right? And it becomes this kind of nightmarish like cycle of just them having these expectations for life to just be this kind of perfect thing, this perfect Instagram post of a thing, and it never becoming that, and them that and it kind of eating away at them. And now, meanwhile, so if so while perfection keeps you at kind of this arm's length regarding Anna and Tom and the their hopes, the things that they think, okay, we're gonna do this and it's gonna be great, and then it does, and then the kind of them being kind of crushed or really crestfallen by the just the way that life isn't that thing where things work out perfectly. Paradais takes a very different approach. Paradais is about a teenager named Polo. He comes from he's like a poor family, and he's 16, and he works as a gardener, groundskeeper at a luxury like housing complex called Paradais. And and where this book where perfection keeps you at a remove, Paradise really puts you into the churning furnace of Polo's thoughts, and where you really just feel his misogyny and his his bitterness, his just kind of churning all the time. And he he gets into a habit of drinking during his work day with a teenager who lives in the complex, this wealthy this boy from a wealthy family, who Polo calls Fat Boy throughout the book. Franco, I think, is actually his name, but Polo almost always calls him or thinks of him as Fat Boy. And from the very first sentence, it was all Fat Boy's fault. That's what he would tell them, that we're on a path to some inexorable, horrible event, but we don't know until that event happens what it is. But the thing about this book is that I mean, the sentences are just amazing. Melchor really kind of gets you uh, in um, Polo's head. Let me see. Okay, I'm gonna find a like the sentences are long, like they're long, but I mean, but not, but in a great way. Like so, you again, you just really feel that like churning kind of just uh, misanthropy that's kind of running through Polo. Let me see. Uh, mm, mm, Okay, so. Uh, okay, yeah. All right, so here's one sentence. So the woman here, the woman being referred to is the mother of one of the families in in this complex, and she, this woman, this mother, fat boy, is utterly sexually like obsessed with her. Right when Polo and Fat Boy go drinking, like Fat Boy basically all he talks about is how, oh, I'm gonna fuck her like this, and it's, you know, whatever, and it's just very like gross, right? Fat Boy like fantasies are, and his kind of entitlement, and you know the way that he views her as just this, you know, object. You know, it's all very very unsavory and unpleasant. Um, and you know, Polo has, as I sort of alluded to, he's internalized a lot of, you know, he carries around a lot of misogyny as well. So okay, so all afternoon Polo did his best to ignore her, but it was as if an invisible force kept putting her in his path. Wherever he turned, there she was, lavishing kisses and hugs on the hordes of little boys and girls running around in swimsuits, and on the women dressed head to toe in tropical prints, as svelte and heavily made up as the hostess herself, their hair straight and inert, as neat and lifeless as wigs, and the husbands just as ridiculous in their pink polos and pastel shirts, ankle grazers and brown loafers, with golf tans and perfectly groomed beards and eyebrows. A clique of pompous voices and clinking ice cubes gathered around that smug, short-ass Moronio who spent the entire party taking photos and talking politics and business in the puffed-up lingo of professional cocksuckers to a fawning audience who knocked back glass after glass of imported whiskey, not even passing to take a look at the hostess's sweet behind, all while their offspring screeched and launched themselves at the juddering, bouncy castle walls like raving lunatics, and did running cannonballs into the pools, shrieking with suicidal glee, yet barely audible over the music blaring from the mounted poolside speakers. Okay, so that was all one sentence, and it's just like the whole book is like that. You just are you're just immersed in Polo's, like, just his observations and how kind of you know, how much he hates like everyone and everything, and the book does not like let Polo off the hook for what he does, because he, you know, he does something, you know, unforgivable, unspeakable, you know, horrifying. um but I think, you know, Melchor does want us to really feel the way in which uh you know, I mean, not so that we feel sorry for him, but I mean, just so we understand the bigger picture and the ways in which this is not just one, you know, like teens, you know, bitter thoughts, but that that Polo is um, shaped by the society in which he lives. Right? We really feel that as we read the book. We, you know, all of the economic strata, the ways in which like the only real opportunities to be in any way kind of liberated and make any kind of actual money seem to be tied up with the narco gangs that are in their town. like it's yeah, it's this fascinating kind of um, social, this portrait of a society in a way, but very much rooted in, like, entirely rooted in one person's experience. And the writing is remarkable. I mean, for all of its ugliness, for all of the ugliness of Polo's churning thoughts, I mean, there's real beauty here too. There's atmospheric, beauty when he and Franco are relaxing and just drinking on this pier nearby where they go to drink. I mean, um, you really feel rooted in Polo's experience, and not just in the ugliness of it, but in the vivid life of it as well. So it's so yeah, like, just a remarkable contrast in the approach of these two books. And neither of these books are books that I'm gonna, like, look back on with warm fondness the way that I do when a book has characters, or at least the way I can when a book has characters, in it that I care about, that I'm, like, rooting for, that maybe go on a more, that have a, that has a more kind of traditional plot where, there's because these books are, I mean, yeah, they don't have what we might consider a kind of traditional plot structure, a traditional narrative structure, either of them. So I don't, and I'm not going to have that, like, Anna and Tom are at a cool distance, and they're not, they're kind of uh, not great people. And then, Polo here, like, is not somebody, like, I was like, okay, 110 pages, that's all the hanging out in Polo's head I want to do. And so, the brevity of this book really works in its favor on multiple levels. But I like both of these books a lot. Yeah. Yes. And finally, the last book I want to talk about is a nonfiction book. It's Didion Babitz, and so this book is by Lili Anolik, and I may be mispronouncing that, but this is a book of, as the title indicates. So it's about Joan Didion and Eve Babitz. Now, I've read a little Joan Didion. I've not read any Eve Babitz, I'm sorry to say. But what is remarkable about this book, I think this is a great book for anyone who cares about writing as a craft and is interested in how, I think we live in an era where, for a lot of people, narrative media of any kind, right? Whether it's a game, like a narrative game or a film or a book, plot is, like, the thing that really matters most, right? But it's, I mean, and in some, like, sure, in a twisty thriller, in a mystery, like, obviously there are stories in which plot is paramount. However, in the overwhelming majority of works, really, it's, to me at least, it's not plot that matters most. It's like how things happen rather than what happens. It's, how the characters talk, speak, how they relate, how they react to the things that happen. And it's certainly, in a novel, it's certainly the way in which the author writes writes about what's unfolding. And Joan Didion. So if you don't know, like, Joan Didion was tremendously lauded and celebrated in the late 20th century, for I mean, for just being a writer who wasted no words. She's a writer of great precision, and um, so this book talks about the connection between her and Eve Babitz, who was a younger L.A. writer who did have a connection with Joan Didion. They did know each other. They spent time together. Um, and but what's fascinating is that Babitz is a very, very different writer than Joan Didion, right? Where Didion's language is precise and like tightly controlled. Um, Eve Eve Babitz as a writer was, her writing breathes. It's kind of it's airy, and it takes up space, and it's and what's remarkable is that this is, I think that this book really shows how, I mean, these aren't, this is about much more than, two ways to be a writer. It's about two very different ideas of what it means to be a woman, and a woman, and a writer who is a woman, because arguably, there's something about Joan Didion where um, it's as if she, was maybe kind of beating the men at their own game, right? Like a kind of, whereas Eve was writing in such a way that was not trying to do that, right? Like, she was really kind of cultivating a voice that was very, very much her own. And there's a great letter in here that Eve wrote to Joan that really, I think, sums it all up. And I want to find it and read it, or at least read some of it here if I can find it. Okay, so here's a letter that I think this is the letter that prompted Lili Anolik. So Lili Anolik had written a previous book about Eve Babitz, which I haven't read. I think it's called Hollywood's Eve, right? Because Eve has a book called, so Eve has a book called Eve's Hollywood. So Lili wrote an earlier book called Hollywood's Eve, Eve Babitz and the Secret History of L.A. But then when she found this letter in among Eve's papers, she decided, I have to write about Eve and Joan and that connection as well. So this is a letter, and I'll talk a little bit about it once I'm done reading it. Okay, so dear Joan, this morning I telephoned and wanted you to read A Room of One's Own, because it struck me because I was thinking about what you said about Quintana, Joan's daughter, and the sprinklers, and I was again remembering this shimmer of accuracy that Virginia Woolf got in The Waves, which you say you haven't read. It's so hard to get certain things together, and especially you and VW, Virginia Woolf, because you're mad at her about her diaries. It's entirely about you that you can't stand her diaries. It goes with Sacramento. Maybe it's better that you stay with Sacramento and hate diaries and ignore the fact that every morning when you eye the breakfast table uneasily, waiting to get away back to your typewriter, maybe it's better that you examine your life in every way except the main one, which Sacramento would brush aside, but which Virginia Woolf kept blabbing on about. Maybe it's about you and Sacramento that you feel it's undignified, not cricket and bad form to let art be one of the variables. Art, my God, Joan, I'm embarrassed to mention it in front of you, but you mentioned burning babies in locked cars, so I can mention art. You said that the only thing you liked to do was write. Just think if it were 200 years ago and the only thing you liked to do was write. I know I'm not making sense, but the thing beyond what your article on the women's movement was about was what A Room of One's Own is about. The whole women's thing that is going on now is so stark and obscene most of the time that no wonder one recoils in horror. But for a long, long time, women didn't have any money and didn't have any time and were considered unfeminine if they shone like you do, Joan. Just think, Joan, if you were 5'11" and wrote like you do and stuff, people would judge you differently in your work. They'd invent reasons. Could you write what you write if you weren't so tiny, Joan? Would you be allowed to if you weren't physically so unthreatening? Would the balance of power between you and John, her husband, um, John Donne, have collapsed long ago if it weren't that he regards you a lot of the time as a child, so it's all right that you're famous? And you yourself keep making it more all right because you are always referring to your size. And so, what you do, Joan, is live in the pioneer days, a brave survivor of the Donner Pass, putting up the preserves and down the women's movement and acting as though art wasn't in the house and wishing you could go right. It embarrasses me that you don't read Virginia Woolf. I feel as though you think she's a woman's novelist, and that only foggy brains could like her, and that you, sharp, accurate journalist, you would never join the ranks of people who sogged around in The Waves. You prefer to be with the boys, snickering at the silly women, and writing accurate prose about Maria, who had everything but art. Vulgar, ill-bred, drooling, uninvited art. It's the only thing that's real other than murder, I sometimes think, or death. Art's the fun part, at least for me. It's the salvation. So there's a real argument to be made, I think, that Joan Didion kind of made herself, like, with her writing, like, took the only route that was maybe available to her to achieve the kind of legitimacy and grand celebration that she did, but also that there's something about it that's, yeah, like that she thought she was kind of like better than women, writers who wrote in a style that kind of was more challenging to kind of accepted notions at the time of what good writing looked like, right? And like, so what comes through in this book, or for me, is that Didion's and Babitz's approaches to writing reflect much, much more than different ideas about writing. They reflect different ideas about what it is to be a woman and to take up space in this world. It's also a really gossipy book, and I say that as a compliment. Like, Eve was, for quite a while, at the center of LA culture, right? So you get to, in this book, almost kind of hang out at like the Troubadour when everyone who was anyone was hanging out there. There's so many appearances in this book by famous rock musicians and comedians and things. There's Jim Morrison, and there's Steve Martin and Harrison Ford, and and just lots of kind of funny, amusing, lively anecdotes. It's a very, very lively book. One that really kind of wants to like pull you in and have you enjoy this. The thrill of being present at these moments where so much was happening artistically and culturally, and where these two, certainly both brilliant writers and brilliant women, but, kind of represented such different approaches to being writers and to being women. Yeah. I think that will do it for me here today. But thank you very much for watching and listening to me talk about some books that I've read recently. I appreciate it. And I hope you all are doing well. Take care. We'll see you soon.